the Waterbenders now. Waterbenders are, they're pretty cool, I guess. Deeply connected to like spiritual stuff too. Some of these people, right? We have two avatars on this list, and we have some bloodbenders on this list. Of course, you gotta put the bloodbenders on this list because, like, that's like they're connected to the moon, right? It's even seen in the symbol of like Water Nation, right? The moon's there, and the waves are there, and like the tides are pulled by like the influences of the moon, right? So, and that's why these people, because I'm an astrologer too, right? These people tend to be more emotionally connected and deeper, you know, into people. But in Avatar: The Last Airbender, these waterbenders can do some amazing things. So at number 10, I have Unalak's twins. You know, the one twin was a girl played by Aubrey Plaza. You know, and then the other one was a guy, I think, right? But those twins were, pretty decent at waterbender techniques. They know how to, use water to attack people. They can turn the water into ice and do that shit. They're, good at using waterbending, pretty damn good. But the ones ahead of her are them both, are, more experienced and better with the waterbending techniques. Like Paku. Paku was a member of the White Lotus, and he was a teacher of Avatar, and one of his teachers. He taught him a little bit when he was in the Northern Water Tribe before General Zhao, attacked the Northern Water Tribe, right? And he, taught, Korra, or not Korra, but Katara and Aang, both. He taught them both waterbending and how to like be more effective with it. Turn ice to water and water to ice and shit like that, and then like using harnessing the power of like water and like summoning more water. But like not to the degrees of people ahead of him. And like that's the thing, Paku's a great waterbending master in his time, and even in like the times of Korra, he would still be able to like throw down with these people. Especially in those times, but like the people I have ahead of them are just kind of better because they start actually harnessing the power of the moon, and we know what that means because we have Hamma at number 8. Hamma was a woman who, was a part of the Southern Waterbenders, the Southern Water Tribe, and she was one of the last ones, caught by her people. She held off for a long time, but then even she got caught. Then she learned bloodbending to escape the firebenders, right? For years, she would take firebenders or people from the Fire Nation, really, and like force them to go down into the cave and dig for her. Because she was traumatized from her times in like their prisons and shit on the ships. They kept water away from them and other things, so she had to adapt. And her way of adapting was bending the water within or the blood within somebody's body. And she was the first bloodbender we met in the series. And she was also like cool with like not just the bloodbending now, like she could pull water out of plants and shit and from thin air. She taught Katara shit like that. She's like, Katara, you have to use your water bending, better. I'll teach you how to like actually be a waterbender. She was, but she was a bit, evil with the way she did shit, because she had been doing that shit for years. At some point, and it's like, she's, traumatized from her past, but like she did that shit for years, taking these people down to the fucking cave for like generations. There are generations of like regular like people in the Fire Nation who don't even like do shit like that. They don't run around and like terrorize the fucking Water Nation. They're just living their lives, and she's taking them down into the cave to like work for her and like against their will and shit because she uses bloodbending to control their bodies. But she was the first bloodbender we met, and then she taught it to Katara. She forced Katara to learn it, out of necessity because she was gonna kill Avatar and Sokka. but then she had to like bust out with it, and that's why I got Katara at number 7. See, Katara ended up learning bloodbending from Hamma, but she didn't like the way bloodbending was. She was still a really good waterbender. She learned from Paku, and she taught Aang. She was teaching Aang waterbending his whole like time, his whole journey. She would like brushing, refine his skills in the waterbending arts. Because Aang did take the waterbending decently. He knew how to like do it pretty well, and she like kept him up to speed and other things. And he was better than she was low key, but she still like she ended up learning better, and doing her thing. She fought against um uh Azula with Zuko. She was the one who ultimately bound her to the floor and shit. But she and she had the like blood bending in her bag, but like she only used it like one time. She didn't use it any other time. She threatened people with it, but she didn't use it. She just continued to like water bend, turn people to ice and like hit them with large amounts of water, cut through shit with water. She had the ability to cut through shit with water. She got creative with the water bending. She used her sweat. She was able to use any liquid. She was able to clean rivers with her water bending. You know, she made great use of her water bending techniques. So I got her at 7. But the ones I have ahead of her are kind of like different. They're built different, powerful in like other ways. Because like how I understand it and how it's seen, the female waterbenders are pretty good at using bloodbending, right? But the way the guys use it, it's like different. And cause like let me talk about Yakon, right? He had the ability to bloodbend, but he didn't have to like wave his arms around and shit. He used his mind. He could blend bend multiple people too, just like the girls could, but he used his mind. He didn't have to like flail his arms around and you know like use like public techniques like that. He had his like mind, and he could do it with his mind. He was damn good at it too. But then Avatar Aang had to come and take his bending away. So then he retreated to like, I don't know, somewhere else. And then he had 2 sons, and he was trying to teach them blood bending, but like he didn't have his bending anymore. But he did his best to teach his sons, and so they can continue to work and make it work. And they took to it too. They were able to blood bend. Both of them were able to. And I just think the way that the guys use it is better than the females, because they don't have to flail their arms around and do all that shit, right? They can just be like, I want you to do this, get me out of my cuffs, and they just see it in their mind, and then they do it. Now, and I have Tarlak, one of his sons at number 5. He was like a Republic City official, somebody who was working for the city and other things, right? He ended up using his bloodbending on or Korra, and like boxing her in a steel, containment unit, right? Somewhere else. He used bloodbending to get her inside of that. And it was like way the fuck away from Republic City. She had to break out of there and get back to Republic City. But he is the brother of Amon, but he um he had to learn bloodbending too. He was like the younger brother, and he did all right, but his brother was just better. Like even with the mind techniques, he could like the way he did it was just more effective and more refined than like his father and Tarlak. So that's why I have Amon at number 4. So Amon was like the son of one of the sons of uh, Yakon, right? And he was really good at bloodbending. He even bloodbended his father and all the wolves and shit. He ended up leaving his father though, because he couldn't take it. He didn't want to listen to the way his father did shit. Then he refined his bloodbending to a great degree to where he could take away people's bending. Um, he was doing that shit, and like he led a group called the Equalists, I believe is they were called. And like he was Korra's first, villain that she had to fight, her first obstacle as the Avatar. And he was taking away people's bending. I remember he fought against a lightning bender who was like, "You ain't gonna like take away my lightning bending. I've been a lightning bender my whole life." And this guy ended up losing his like lightning bending. And he was like, "Oh shit." And this guy is, and he like had a whole bunch of people like on display. He was like, let me show you common folks, who are fearful of the benders, like what my power can bring and other things. Like, let me show you that I can, create an equal world. And like, once I take the avatar's bending away, there'll be no one to stop me and everybody will be, on equal footing, essentially, and how he did it, but like, he's not a bender, but like, Avatar Korra did expose him after she got her bending taken away. Um, but she unlocked air bending because what happened with her was she was really, not taking the airbending well, but she knew how to use the other three elements, water, fire, and earth, but she couldn't use airbending that well. She then, unlocked airbending. She exposed Amon for what he was. And he ended up summoning water to, protect himself from falling and shit. And they were like, "Oh shit, the guy we're following is a waterbender." He was using bloodbending techniques, advanced bloodbending techniques to like the highest degree. And that's why I have him at number 4. I got Koruku at number 3. I do have the avatars in high regard because they can like break out of shit like, bloodbending and shit by accessing the, avatar state. And with doing that, it's just powerful, they have the past lives and shit to like, help them out through shit like that. Now, Koruku was the avatar, water avatar before Korra. He was before Avatar Kyoshi in the cycle and shit. And after Yang Chen, he was pretty damn good at his waterbending, right? But he was like really keen on like the spiritual aspect of things and fighting the demons in spirit world. And it was like fucked up too how his story was because he was so focused on the spirit world aspect of things that his like one of these spirits ended up, coming and taking his like girl's face. Code the face stealer came and took his girl's face. And then I think he ended up dying to Code the face stealer too. Ultimately he ended up dying too. But he was a damn good waterbender, and like in his time he like really, kind of like neglected the human world, like the real world, and focused more on like the, spiritual world and the spiritual battles more. Because he felt that if he like, because like we know that the spirit world and the human world's connected. And anything bad happening in the spirit world is gonna lead to things happening in the real world or the physical world. So he was like, let's start there and like get that shit, figured out. But like he was doing that shit too much, and that ended up leading to his like demise. But I do think he could beat anybody like below him in a fight if he had to. That being said, I have Unalak at number 2. Unalak was, I believe he was Korra's, uncle, but he like loved the spiritual sides of waterbending. He was a northern waterbender. He like went to the Northern Water Tribe in Korra's time, and he was pretty damn good at waterbending. I have his, children, the twins, on at number 10, and I have him at number 2. And I have him at number 2 because he was, really looking into like the spiritual side of things, and he ended up finding Vatu, right, the evil spirit. See, the Avatar was connected to the other spirit. What, Rahu, or not Rahu, but Rava. And then Vatu was the evil spirit who would, plunge the world into like darkness and chaos, right? for like another like 10,000 years and shit, you know. But like the first Avatar ended up fighting against this entity and became the first Avatar because he fused with the good spirit of Rahu or whatever the good spirit's name was. I forget. But Vatu was then defeated. But he like still exists because, you know, good cannot exist without evil and evil can't exist without good. So, you know, that's where that came into play, right? So he was still there, right? He still existed and everything else, but he was growing power. And like, you know, Unalak knew that, and he wanted to be the Dark Avatar. He wanted to be the vessel for Batu and see how he could change the world. So he became the Dark Avatar, you know, the only one known and other things, right? And then he ended up fighting Korra. You know, he had waterbending techniques and other things too, but ultimately Korra was able to defeat him. You know, um, and he's at number 2, but number 1 is Avatar Korra. You know, she was, you know, not as good as Aang as an Avatar, but she was still pretty damn good because she was able to, you know, pop out with 3 of the, you know, bending techniques mastered at a young age. Or like she knew how to use them at least. Maybe not mastered, but she could like, you know, summon fire, use earth bending, use water bending. But air bending was a hard thing for her. She was a waterbender. She's really good at using water bending. I don't think she knows how to do blood bending, but she's, you know, a waterbender. You know, that's what the tribe she comes from, and that's why she was the next in the cycle. You know, she's also, you know, connected to, you know, she has ties to the spirit world. She ended up meeting people. Like she met Aro in the spirit world. So she's like, you know, like I said before this video and shit, that the waterbenders are deeply connected to the spirit world and shit. You know, they had the fish in like Avatar Last Airbender. But Avatar Korra had a deep connection to the spirit world. But she did end up like destroying the linkage between the avatars in the past lives, you know, and she basically had to start it all over again with her being like the first new avatar or whatever, because the way that season 2 ended, right, the spirit world and the human world were like, they were at an imbalance and shit, right? You know, the avatar lost her connection to, you know, Rava, but then she got it back. But she was the first one. She couldn't get in contact with Aang anymore or any of the other ones before her. And she had to like start the shit from scratch essentially. She didn't become the first avatar, but she became like the new avatar with like the spirit world and the human world being at imbalance, and she had to now, you know, deal with the consequences of that battle she had with Unalak in defeating Batu. You know, I guess turning him back into a smaller being because, you know, evil still exists, but he's just, you know, small instead of like huge how he was. But she, you know, did her job. You know, we seen Avatar Korra, you know, she had what, 4 seasons? You know, and she did what she could during the time she was Avatar, you know. And like I said, she was pretty damn good at waterbending. You know, she never had a problem with it. So that is my ranking of like the top 10 waterbenders, most powerful waterbenders in Avatar series. Be cool on the corner and let me know what you think. Let me know what you think in the comments section. And be cool on the corner.